title of my presentation tonight is The Creator, the Law, and Evolution. Now, when I say evolution, I'm not referring to the evolution of organisms. I'm referring to the evolution of sin, where it was in the beginning, how it started, and as a virus, how it really corrupted the heart of humanity as a whole. Let's just go ahead and jump right in here. I'm going to go ahead and read verses 18 to 23, and then we're going to stop. We're going to dissect it a little bit. We're going to talk about it a little bit. It's on the screen there for those who would like to follow along on the screen. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him, not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. How many of you guys are familiar with ChatGPT, or have you heard of ChatGPT? Quick show of hands. More so the younger generation. So ChatGPT, for those who don't know, is basically, okay, let me back it up. How many of you are familiar with AI? You've heard of the term AI before, artificial intelligence, right? Yeah, your phone uses it a lot. Siri actually is artificial intelligence in a way. But so I was kind of interested, and I've used ChatGPT before for various different studies and various different kinds of research and things of that nature. So I was very interested to see what ChatGPT had to say about Romans, and in specifics, Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, hey, ChatGPT, can you summarize Romans chapter 1, verse 18 for me? And here's what GPT had to say. The core reason for God's wrath upon humanity lies in the rejection of divine revelation. God's desire for people to know him underlies this. Rejecting this desire leads to his wrath. This wrath, however, aligns with his goodness and righteousness. God's anger at sin is intrinsic to his righteousness, and the cross exemplifies how he maintains both justice and love. This perspective also addresses the fate of those who haven't heard the gospel, asserting that everyone has received some level of divine revelation. If individuals respond positively to the truth they know, it becomes God's responsibility to bring that specific gospel message to them. And so when I read this, I thought, wow, this is actually quite profound. The amount of details that ChatGPT extrapolated out of this one verse here. In summary, if I were to shorten that into one statement, it would be this. Creation demands a creator. It's sort of like this. The idea that we as a humanity or as a human race came together through a series of random causes and through a series of evolution, we are here today. And one of the things that's very, very interesting is prior to the known fact that the universe actually had a beginning, it was widely known, or widely believed, I should say, that the universe was eternal. The universe has been, always was, and will forever be. Because how else do you explain how we're here today? In a lecture some years ago, Stephen Hawking stated, in contrary to this prior widely held belief, the universe has not existed forever. Now, this was a very, very big shock to the scientific community, because here we as scientists believe that the universe was eternal, and that means that there's no creator, the universe was just always there. So Stephen Hawking, one of the most respected scientists in the scientific community, comes along and says, the universe has not existed forever. Dr. Jeffrey Fall, in The Origin of the Universe, wrote this: "Science now confirms that there has been no past eternity of matter." Okay, so not only has the universe not existed, for all eternity, it actually had a beginning. Matter itself also had a beginning. This is unprecedented because this contradicts and makes a problem for all of the different theories that the science community has out today. Notice this quote by Nobel Prize-winning scientist George Wald. He says, "The reasonable view was to believe in spontaneous generation. The only alternative, to believe in a single primary act of supernatural creation. There is no third position. One only has to contemplate the magnitude of this task to concede that the spontaneous generation of a living organism is simply impossible. Yet, here we are as a result. I believe of spontaneous generation." Romans chapter 1, verse 22 says, "Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools." Here we have a respected Nobel Prize-winning scientist who says that it is absolutely impossible for spontaneous generation to be a thing. Life does not come from non-life. Life can only come from life. But yet he believes this to be the case for why we humans are here today. Now, if you ask me, that's a little bit contradictory and kind of foolish, because on one hand, you'd say that spontaneous generation or life coming from non-life is absolutely impossible, but then on the other hand, you say, even though it's impossible, I believe that's exactly how we're here today. It doesn't make any sense. And Romans chapter 1, verse 22 rings very clear for this exact statement here. Now, I'd like to establish a quick precedent before moving forward. Back in verse chapter 17, and it's not up on the screen, but I'll read it here for you, in Romans chapter 1, verse 17, "For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." Paul states the gospel, or the good news about Jesus, is God's power to save people who trust in him, and that it reveals God's righteousness. You see, for Paul, righteousness is a rich and meaty word from the Torah that describes the character of God. This conveys and shows to the reader of Paul's letters that God has always acted in a way that is just and right, that God is faithful to fulfill his promises. Paul is telling us and trying to show us that God has done both of these things. So, through the entirety of Romans chapter 1, 23 on, Paul essentially goes into a long creative retelling of Genesis chapter 3, verses 11, showing how the Gentile world, essentially all nations, have become trapped in a spiral of sin and selfishness. He shows how the evolution of sin has come from one point and has essentially laid out its trajectory and has corrupted humanity on a much, much, much deeper level as it moves throughout history. Broken human heart and mind, turned from God, embraced idolatry, significance in created things rather than the Creator himself. Hence why I mentioned about the universe, right? Because God is the one who created the universe. And instead of seeking to understand and to know and to have a relationship with the one who created the universe, there's a lot of people who want to have a relationship with the universe itself. My dear friend who came up and gave her story about some of her friends who believe in all these different spiritual things and believe in the universe is a prime example. I know many, many people who say that the universe is alive. The universe is in all of us. We are a part of the universe. The universe is us. And a lot of this is, it sounds good, and it sounds grand, and it sounds beautiful, but Lucifer was also one of the most beautiful things that was ever created. Not everything that looks beautiful is actually true and just. So, the result is the distortion of human nature and destructive behavior. So what's left? A humanity that stands before a just and righteous God. Now, I'm going to jump back to Genesis chapter 6 real quick, because I want to show you guys something here. So remember I told you that what Paul is doing here in Romans chapter 1, 18 all the way through 32 is he's doing a creative retelling of Genesis chapter 3, verses 11, and how the corruption of humanity has led us to where we are today. Now, I believe Genesis chapter 6 holds one of the most damning passages, one of the most interesting, frightful passages that I've ever seen in Scripture. It says this: "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for repenteth the man that I have made him. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." Now, I've done a lot of research on what the world was like during this period right before the flood. There isn't a whole lot of information out there on it. A lot of it is speculation, but I can only imagine that in the world that we live in right now, where we have pedophilia, where we have rapists, where we have all sorts of violence, the shooting that just happened in Maine, where a gentleman gunned down 15 plus people and injured 40 something plus people, right? The massacre that back in Las Vegas, and all these different Sandy Hook school shooting, right? We, in the modern society, we look at these events and we say, oh my God, how wicked, how disgusting is this? How could somebody actually be thinking to do something like this to innocent people? Take what you think is the most vile, most wickedest thing, and imagine every single human being on planet with those same thoughts. It's a picture that, truthfully, I can't even fathom, and I don't want to fathom it. So you can just imagine what the world looked like. Granted, I don't think that there was billions and billions of people on the earth during that time, but the fact of the matter is, the entire population had to be destroyed. Now, I don't necessarily believe that the flood was a judgment. And hear me out. Some people might say, that's borderline heretical, Mr. Hamilton. I don't necessarily believe that the flood was a judgment or even punishment. Rather, the world could not exist because of all the sin and corruption. To make it a little bit easier for you to understand, let's take the analogy of a hard drive. You guys are familiar with computer hard drives. The hard drive is supposed to be this solid state device. And everything on the hard drive, once it's created and manufactured out of the factory, is perfect. It runs beautifully. It looks beautiful. It does exactly what it needs to do. It holds all the information that it needs to have, and not a single piece of data is corrupted. Now, imagine what would happen if you had a virus that ended up on your computer, an uncontrollable virus, and there was absolutely no way for you to eradicate the virus. And so what happens when this virus completely takes over and corrupts the hard drive? Well, as a former computer technician, I can tell you exactly what would happen. That entire hard drive has to be formatted. And when I mean by formatted, I mean every single piece of data on that hard drive needs to be completely wiped, and we need to restart it from the beginning. There's simply no way that you can just pluck out the pieces of the virus and move it like that. It wouldn't work because it's too far gone. There's nothing more left for it to do. That's why I think when God in those verses said it saddened him, it repented God, because everything was always violence. The heart of man was continually wicked. You see, God wasn't punishing the corrupt generation. He was simply pushing the reset button because there was nothing else to do with it. Paul in Romans says the wages of sin is death. So we come back to Romans chapter 2. And Paul is essentially telling this Christian, Jewish, Gentile community of Rome, about all these things and the heart of humanity and what has transpired and how sin has evolved from the beginning of time up until where we are tonight, where we are today. You can just imagine the response of the fellow Jews in the audience. See, it's a good thing that we're the chosen people, right? Yeah, God gave us the 10 Commandments on the Mount. We're the Israelites. We're good, you know? We got the circumcision, we got the Sabbath, we got everything, right? It's those Christian Gentiles over there that need this, that need to be reprimanded. Paul says, no, not so fast. You think just because of these things you're any better than those people over there? See, if you're going to remember these things, why not remember all of it, shall we? How about the time when Moses came down from the mountain and you guys were all dancing around the fire with a golden calf? How about that time? Or how about the time you guys attempted to collect manna on the Sabbath? Or how about the other time you guys failed to trust God and did not enter the promised land as a result of that? Paul is speaking directly to those who are under the law, those who practice Judaism. And it's interesting because Paul is not just some random street preacher that you see today in society. Paul has credentials. Paul is well known. Paul was a zealot. Paul was a Pharisee. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 4, Paul puts it this way. He says, "Though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh that he hath, where he might trust in the flesh, I have more." So, essentially what Paul is saying here is, listen, I know you guys have studied the Bible and you guys have studied the Torah and everything like that. It's great and everything, but trust me when I tell you, I've been through this, okay? I'm one of the teachers of the Word. I used to be a Pharisee. I used to be at the very pinnacle of what the law is, of what the law stands for, of what the law actually means. He goes on to say, well, circumcised on the 8th day, tribe of the Benjamin, Hebrew of Hebrews, concerning the zeal, persecuting the church, and all these things. He keeps doing all this, right? Paul precedes his long list of credentials by noting that his Jewish accomplishments far surpass those of his spiritual opponents. You see, they sought to justify themselves by the law. But it's interesting. Paul teaches that these traits are unimportant for those who seek to truly know God. Paul goes on to say, but what things were to gain to me? Those were counted a loss for Christ. Paul is saying, listen, all that's great. My credentials are great. If you have credentials, that's great too. But it's absolutely unimportant to the big picture. And the big picture here truly is Christ. If you want to get to know God, it's Christ. That's who you need to go through. So, what of the law then, right? After boosting their heads up and talking to them and saying, yes, you guys are the chosen people. You guys are the chosen generation. God did give his oracles to you. Is simply having the law and being circumcised enough? No. Paul says it's not enough. Jewishness or any other sect of religious rituals and sacraments is about what's going on inside of a person and not what is on the outside. This takes me back to Matthew chapter 15 when the Pharisees approach Jesus' disciples and they say to him, hey, your disciples, they didn't wash their hands before they started eating. Don't you know that it's a Jewish tradition and it's Jewish law that before you eat, you have to wash your hands because you're going to be defiled? And Jesus plainly looks at them and says, listen, it's not about what goes inside of you, but what comes out of you. Now, it's interesting. A lot of people will take this verse and say, or actually, in some versions and in some translations of the Bible, after Jesus says what he says, in parentheses, he says, thus declaring all foods clean. But what's interesting here is, for somebody to say that, I feel as though they've missed the entire context of what was going on, because the context wasn't about food at all. It was about the washing of the hands, right? Jesus reiterates exactly what Paul is going to reiterate in a little bit here. He says, don't you not yet understand that whatsoever entereth in at the mouth goeth into the belly and is cast out into draught? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashen hands defileth not a man. Now, after explaining all of this, Paul brings his first point to a close. He starts this by engaging in a question and answer session. He asks, "What advantage then hath the Jew? Or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that to them were committed to the oracles of God. For if some did not believe, for what if some did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the faith of God without effect? If merely having the law or being circumcised isn't enough to prevent God's judgment, then what's the point of being a Jew? What exactly is the advantage?" That's the question that's being asked here. It's true. God did commit the oracles to you guys. He did commit his word to you guys. This is one of the proofs that God has continually remained faithful to Israel in spite of her unfaithfulness. See, Paul then asked the question, what then? Are we better than they are? No, not at all. It was common practice for the Jews to see the Gentiles as unclean. But as we recall back in the book of Acts, God explicitly tells our friend Peter, "Do not call common what I have called clean." And here again, he's not referring to food, but he's talking about men. He's talking about people. He's talking about you and I. Here's the punchline. In unraveling the profound tapestry of human nature, Paul transcends the distinctions between Jew and Gentile, revealing the universal embrace of sin. The sacred law, once thought to be a sanctuary, stands powerless to alter this inherent human condition. Drawing upon the ancient verses, Paul weaves a mosaic of our collective transgressions, illustrating how every fiber of our being, from throats to eyes, echoes the symphony of sin. In his resolute proclamation, he declares the futility of seeking justification through the meticulous observance of the law. A stark revelation that the law illuminates our sins, but offers no sanctuary for our salvation. You see, under the law, you have no power and cannot fulfill it. Under grace, your life fulfills the law because the power of God is in you. We have been separated from the law to be married to Christ. There was a huge fight, and Paul even went up to Jerusalem for this, about the whole idea of circumcision, right? If these Gentiles have now received the word of God, and these Gentiles profess to be Christians, shouldn't they also become circumcised? Because that was the covenant that God made with us, Israelites, the chosen people. So they should have to do that too. Oh, also, they should have to follow all the 613 laws of the Torah as well. Only then can they become true Christians in the sight of God. But you see, what's interesting is Paul, in the beginning of Romans, and even later on in the book of Romans, as you guys will see the following next Fridays, is the whole point that Paul is trying to make here is, listen, guys, the law did its job. It did what it needed to do for the time that it needed to do it. Here we have somebody greater. Here we have Christ himself. You are not under the law anymore. You are under grace. Now, later on in Romans, one of the questions that are asked is, because we're not under the law, but we're under grace, do we then make void the law? And Paul says, no, God forbid. We establish the law. And as I just mentioned right here, under grace, your life fulfills the law because the power of God is in you. It's the power of Christ unto righteousness that works in and through us for us to be able to fulfill the law. Circumcision isn't needed anymore. Circumcision is simply null and void. The idea that circumcision had to happen for someone to be a true Christian was somebody, or the Pharisees and their group of people trying to hold on desperately to what they have practiced for the past thousands and thousands of years. Now, I get it. It's not easy to let go of something you've been practicing for generation after generation after generation after generation. But you see, that's what Christ came to do. Christ came to break those chains. He came to break those bondages that we were so held down by. It's okay. You can let it go. Now, a lot of people will say that we don't have to keep the 10 Commandments in order to be saved. The 10 Commandments, the law, does not save us. And I agree with that last part. The 10 Commandments, the law absolutely does not save you. It's right here. Paul says it. It doesn't save you. It's Christ who saves you. And it's through Christ that the fruits of your actions and how people see you and your walk, the law gets established throughout your life. That's exactly how that works. Paul is making it a very, very significant point to help us to understand that all we need is Christ. It is only the power of Christ that allows for us to be able to fulfill anything in our lives. Whether it's small, whether it's big, whether it's seemingly insignificant, it is only in and through the power of Christ that help us to bring us to any success, and more importantly, unto salvation and righteousness. That, my esteemed ladies and gentlemen, is Paul's thesis statement as our guide as we roam through Romans. So think about this tonight. Me growing up in the Seventh-day Adventist church all my life, it was always about the do's and the don'ts. Don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do that. You can do that, but don't do the other thing. And I felt like I was under bondage. I felt like I was under the law. It comes to a point when you have to step back and take a look at it for yourself and say, what's really going on here? I came to the realization that while the law is important, yes, the most important thing is the relationship that you and I have with Christ. We are completely powerless without Christ to do anything. Absolutely anything. And once I came to that important realization, it shifted my entire thought process on how I see my life in relation to God, how I see the relationships I have in relation to God, and how I see myself as a human being in relation to other people. You know, it's very, very important that we understand this one little thing, and that's our relationship with Christ. Paul says somewhere later in the book of Romans that love is the fulfillment of the law. And we know that God is love. So once we have made it a point in our lives to establish and hold fast to that relationship with Christ, to love thoroughly, to love deeply, and to love supremely, we will, through love and through the power of Christ, fulfill the law.
Hey everyone, thank you for coming to worship with us. If you want to connect with us, visit gotherefore.org/IHaveDecided. For more videos, visit our page gotherefore.org or download our app at gotherefore.app. And remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again.